Cador's Pacific Region, podcast number 8, Pemberton. The Pemberton Aerodrome is located in southwestern British Columbia, 15 nautical miles north of Whistler Village and 4 nautical miles east of the village of Pemberton. Runway 624 is asphalt, 3,917 feet long and 100 feet wide. The circuit is to the north, with runway 24 having right-hand circuits. In this episode, we have 4 Cador's reports occurring at Pemberton to discuss. I'm Brad Crockett, a private pilot, single-engine land. Joining me is Manuel Erickson. Manuel holds a commercial pilot's license and is a former flight instructor. Welcome back, Manuel.
Thanks, Brad. It's a good feeling to help advance aviation safety by analyzing these reports.
Our first report is Cador's number 1997 P0077. The Transportation Safety Board reports that on February 13, 1997, the Cessna 150, registration Gulf Hotel Alpha Kilo, departed Princeton en route to Powell River. The pilot planned to follow the Coquihalla route, but, due to weather, attempted the Lillooet route instead. The pilot reported carburetor icing and an airspeed indicator malfunction. With darkness approaching, the pilot attempted to land at the Pemberton Airport at 2:15 Zulu. The nose wheel collapsed on landing. Only the pilot was on board. There were no injuries. That's the end of the report. Manuel, Princeton is on the Hope-Princeton VFR route, but it's not on the Coquihalla Highway. What do you think the pilot's plan was?
Brad, your guess is as good as mine. I would have returned to Princeton to do additional careful planning, but he elected to try a longer route instead. He could have flown the Highway 3 VFR route to Hope along the Fraser Valley, past Vancouver, and north to Powell River depending on clouds and weather. The route provides lots of airports for fuel, washrooms, and restaurants.
If the pilot was in Pemberton around 4:15 local in February, something must not have gone to plan. Powell River is at least another hour.
Yes, bad planning. We don't know what route he actually flew from Princeton to intercept the so-called Lillooet route. Flying straight from Princeton to Lillooet is over 100 nautical miles. But he would have had to stay below the mountaintops and follow roads and rivers, lengthening the trip and making it necessary to refuel at Lillooet and perhaps stay overnight.
What can we do when planning VFR cross-country flights to make them as safe as possible?
It all depends on the time of year, I would think. Flying cross-country over mountainous territory in a plane like the 150 in winter would be very trying. So first, I would choose a good season for such flying in a 150. Then I would plan to fly as high as I can. If flying above the mountains isn't possible, then following the VFR routes is by far the safest way to go. I would plan stops along the way. Third, I would top up the tanks to the brim at each stop. Fourth, I would have my emergency kit on board, including water, food, and a sleeping bag. As well, dressing in clothes suitable for sleeping under the wing in the mountains if forced down. Fifth, I would definitely take a portable emergency beacon like the Spot.
Our second report is Cador's number 1997 P0132 and related report 1997 P0119. Transportation Safety Board reports that on March 9, 1997 at 0300 hours Zulu, the instructor pilot of a Cessna 172, registration Foxtrot Bravo Oscar Gulf, was en route from Williams Lake to Sechelt, leading a Cessna 150, registration Foxtrot Quebec India Lima, being flown by an inexperienced student pilot. Nearing Whistler, the aircraft began to encounter deteriorating weather, and the 172 pilot decided to divert to Lillooet. However, when passing Pemberton, the weather and failing light were such that the pilot decided to land. The pilot assessed that the snow-covered landing surface was suitable for both aircraft, and he landed first. The snow depth was about 2.5 feet, deeper than he had judged, and the propeller dug into the snow, stopping the engine. The pilot was not injured, and there was no other reported damage to the aircraft. On touchdown, the 150 dug into the snow and flipped over. The pilot was uninjured and escaped without difficulty, but the aircraft was substantially damaged. That's the end of the report. When receiving a briefing from the Flight Information Center, will they advise of conditions like these for aerodromes on the route of flight?
The flight information system was new in 1997. I could not determine if the Kamloops FIC was operational at that time. Today, the FIC has information from many airports that they pass on to pilots during a briefing. Today, pilots can call Pacific Radio on 126.7 for conditions at Pemberton and at many other airports.
There is a weather camera at the Pemberton Airport now, but probably not in 1997. Do weather cameras provide an indication of snow depth?
I looked at the Pemberton weather camera and found that it provides views to both the west and the east. In winter, if the lens is not blocked, it would provide these views and show snow, but it might be difficult to estimate the depth. Communicating with the Kamloops FIC on 126.7 might help.
Can Flight Information Service en route help determine aerodrome conditions when faced with the necessity to divert?
If you mean en route to a diversion airport, then yes. For information from Pemberton to Lillooet, for example, pilots would call 122.375. However, I think the FIC would be dependent on pilots giving them PIREPs, or pilot reports.
When approaching a runway that is snow-covered, can snow depth be assessed visually?
Sometimes. It would depend on how much snow has fallen and on whether there are aircraft tracks on the runway. Some airports might have a vehicle to plow a runway, but estimating snow depth from the air is virtually impossible in my experience.
What would it be like in the air near Pemberton around 6 p.m. local time? Would the pilot have been better to carry on to Lillooet if weather allowed?
I could not find a table showing the beginning of civil twilight for March 1997, and I had to use one for March 2016. It shows the start of civil twilight to be 18:43 or 6:43 p.m. local time for Pemberton, with sunset at 18:10 Zulu or 6:10 p.m. local time. The Cessna 172 arrived at about 7 p.m., 50 minutes after sunset, and 17 minutes after civil twilight, which is well past the time when light would have been good. Being a slower aircraft, the Cessna 150 probably arrived even later. When the 172 arrived, visibility would have been poor, especially with snow making the surface look relatively smooth. I think the subsiding air would have made flying rather smooth. If the instructor pilot had decided to divert to Lillooet, he would have been going away from the light in the west because Lillooet is northeast of Pemberton. They might have been better off diverting to Squamish, 36 miles to the southwest. However, with a failing light and the mountainous terrain, visibility would have been perhaps fair to bad. Another option was to climb for greater visibility and better communication, but the failing light would probably have ruled that out. Frankly, I cannot understand why the instructor pilot took off from Williams Lake so late in the day. From Williams Lake to Sechelt is at least 180 nautical miles. The chances of both aircraft arriving there safely so late in the day would have been small. The 150 would have taken about 2 hours to fly to Sechelt. Had I been in that instructor pilot's position, I would have delayed leaving Williams Lake until the next morning.
Our third report is Cador's number 2006P1988. NAV Canada reports that on October 18th at 1:15 Zulu, the Cessna 170, registration Golf Mike Sierra Charlie, was on a VFR flight from Pemberton to Victoria. After 1.5 hours in the vicinity of Vancouver, the pilot became aware that the fuel gauges indicated substantially less fuel than should have been present at that stage of the flight. Suspecting a fuel leak, the pilot decided to divert to Boundary Bay, where the aircraft landed without further event. Inspection revealed that the right-hand wing tank was leaking. That's the end of the report. I was taught not to trust fuel gauges, but still to monitor them. I guess this is why.
You're absolutely right, Brad. It's always best to dip the tanks before the first flight of the day and to top up when necessary. A pilot familiar with his or her aircraft would also know the fuel consumption at cruise, say, so many gallons per hour.
What should we be doing to prevent fuel starvation?
Fuel starvation is commonly caused by the presence of water. Water has a higher specific gravity than fuel, so it will collect in the bottom of the tank. Since fuel is usually drawn from the lowest part of the tank, water will be delivered to the engine instead of fuel, causing starvation. On the other hand, fuel exhaustion is usually caused by a full or partial blockage somewhere in the fuel system, though there could be plenty of fuel available. But the end result is the same: engine stoppage. I would also say that the pilot acted responsibly and landed at the first available airport.
Our final report is CDORS number 2015 P0911. NAV Canada reports that on June 6, 2015, at 22:06 Zulu, a privately registered Vans RV-7 was flying VFR from Pemberton to Victoria. The aircraft entered the Vancouver Terminal Class Charlie airspace prior to receiving approval. That's the end of the report. What are the rules for entering Class Charlie?
Aircraft flying under VFR require permission to enter any Class Charlie airspace before actually entering that airspace. Plain and simple. Pilots must obtain permission first. Beyond that, it is advisable to listen to the ATIS broadcast from about 5 to 10 miles from the Class Charlie zone boundary. Then to establish radio contact with intentions and transponder code.
Are there risks to safety for not following these rules?
Certainly. Bumbling into a Class Charlie zone without permission could bring disciplinary repercussions. Telling ATC the type of aircraft you are flying and giving your transponder code will provide ATC with your location. Pilots should press the squawk ident button on the transponder if and when requested. Failure to comply with these simple rules could put incoming aircraft and others at risk of collision.
What can pilots do to be sure that they don't accidentally enter controlled airspace without permission?
They should know where the Class C zone begins relative to their flight course and make the necessary call to ATC before they reach it.
That's it for this episode. You can reach the podcast at our website, which is cadors.ca. Manuel, how can people reach you?
Well, I can be reached at pilot80@shaw.ca.
Thank you, Manuel, for taking the time to speak with us today.
Oh, it was a pleasure to be here, Brad. I really enjoy these sessions.
And thank you for listening as we take advantage of our license to learn. Please note that for the most part, Transport Canada CDORS reports contain preliminary, unconfirmed data which can be subject to change. This podcast is provided by cadors.ca, not by Transport Canada or any other government agency.